Welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories, or I will come for you. A reminder that all stories are available on my podcast. The Curator, Dark Web Horror Anthology, is available on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Without further ado, today's story, The Feed Beneath the Floorboards, by The Curator. I've gone back and forth on posting this. A big part of me still thinks I should delete everything I've written, smash the laptop I'm typing on, and go sit in a motel room somewhere until whatever is left of this passes over me. But that would be stupid. If there is one thing I understand now, it is that silence is how places like that survive. Silence, shame, and people telling themselves they probably misunderstood what they saw. So I'm writing this down while I still can. I'm writing it in one pass. I'm not polishing it. I'm not trying to make it sound clever or dramatic. I'm just going to tell it the way it happened, or at least the way I remember it happening, which is harder than it should be. My name does not matter, so call me Rook Vey. That is not my real name, but it is close enough to the kind of name I used online when I still thought exposing monsters from behind a screen meant I was somehow different from them. 3 months ago, my father died. 2 months ago, I inherited his house. 5 weeks ago, I found a live stream running beneath the floorboards. And if I had left when I first got there, if I had turned around in the driveway and driven back to the city, I think I could still pretend that my childhood was just the normal kind of bad. A drunk father, a rotting house, too many locked doors, too much shouting through walls. Instead, I stayed. And now I know what was under us the whole time. I know what he was. And I know what I was becoming before I finally understood what the house had been trying to turn me back into. I grew up in a place called Marlowe's Ridge, which sounds made up even to me now. It is one of those dead little rural towns that barely qualifies as a town. One petrol station, one takeaway place, a school that always looked half abandoned even when it was full. A church with no congregation under 60. The kind of place where everybody knows when your curtains are closed too long and nobody says a word when a child starts showing up with bruises. My father, Gideon Vey, lived on the very edge of town in a sagging weatherboard house set back from the road behind a belt of dead trees and a rusted wire fence. The property looked older than it was. Everything around it seemed to rot faster than it should. The gutters were always clogged, the paint always peeled, the smell of damp never really left, even in summer. My earliest memory of that house is not a person. It is the sound, a slow knock from somewhere below me while I was lying in bed. 3 taps, then silence. 3 taps again. I remember staring at the cracked blue ceiling over my bed and trying to convince myself it was pipes. My father told me it was always pipes. If I asked about noises in the walls, it was pipes. If I heard somebody crying outside after midnight, it was foxes. If I asked why one of the interior doors suddenly had a new deadbolt on it, he said the wind had been rattling it. Every answer in that house was either pipes, foxes, or wind. When I was 17, I left after a fight that turned physical enough for the neighbors to finally look over the fence and then look away again. I never went back. I told myself that was strength. That leaving was what separated me from him. I built a life in the city, if you can call it that. I had a website for a while, then a channel, then a blog. I covered disappearances, scams, cult nonsense, snuff hoax forums, low-level criminal communities on hidden services, all the filth that gathers online when enough people are bored and broken and anonymous at the same time. I got enough attention to start believing I mattered. Then I got sloppy. Or maybe arrogant. You can only tell people you are exposing darkness for so long before you start chasing it for the thrill instead of the principle. My last good year disappeared fast. Sources dried up. Bills didn't. I picked up freelancing gigs, then lost those too. By the time the call came about my father's death, I was 3 weeks behind on rent and pawning things in careful order, based on what I thought I could live without longest. So when the solicitor told me the house was mine now, I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. Then guilt for feeling relief. Then a kind of grim, practical hope. The plan was simple. Drive up, clear it out, sell whatever I could, list the place, pay off a few debts, and never think about Gideon Vey again. That plan lasted maybe 6 hours. The house was worse than I remembered. The front porch leaned slightly to the left. One of the windows in the lounge room had been patched with cloudy plastic and tape. The kitchen smelled like old grease and wet timber. There were water stains spreading down the hallway walls like maps of rivers. My father's chair was still in the same corner by the television, angled toward the room like he had just stood up from it. His things were everywhere, but not in any way that suggested a person had lived there. It felt more like a set that had been dressed to imply a man. Boots by the door, a mug with a tea ring in it, half a packet of cigarettes, an old radio, folded shirts, but none of it had warmth. None of it felt touched. It was just evidence of occupation. The first day I stayed busy on purpose. Open windows, strip beds, bag rubbish, ignore memory. That was the method. I found old tools, unpaid notices, magazines, stained blankets, loose nails, drawers full of receipts and batteries and dead lighters. I found nothing valuable and a lot of things I wished I had never put my hands on. By evening, I was exhausted and angry in that restless way only old houses can make you angry. That night, I slept in my childhood room because I could not bring myself to use his. The ceiling was still cracked in the same branching line I used to think looked like a bird in flight. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to 3 knocks under the floor. 3 taps, then silence. My whole body went tight. I lay there listening so hard my teeth hurt. Nothing. After a while, I laughed at myself, quietly and bitterly. Old house. Pipes. That was what I told myself. The next morning, I started going through the rooms my father had always kept locked when I was young. Most were empty now or full of junk. One smelled heavily of mildew and mouse droppings. Another held boxes of old VHS tapes with handwritten labels that meant nothing to me. A third was packed with rotten furniture under sheets. The last room I opened was at the back of the house, near the utility room. There was almost nothing in it, except a steel shelving unit, a folded tarp, and an old desktop tower sitting on a table with a dust cover over it. That stopped me. My father hated computers, or pretended to. He barely used a mobile phone. Seeing that tower there felt wrong in a way I cannot explain properly. Not surprising exactly. Like finding a loaded gun in the hands of someone who always claimed to hate guns. The machine looked old, but clean. Cleaner than anything else in the house. I should have unplugged it and left it alone. Instead, I hauled it out, found a monitor in another room, cursed through a nest of cables, and got it powered on. It booted. Not quickly, but cleanly. There was a password lock on the main user account. I bypassed it after an hour, because there are certain skills you do not lose even when your life is falling apart. Once I was in, I found an almost empty desktop. No family photos, no documents, no email, nothing ordinary. Just one folder with a nonsense name and a browser I did not recognize. Inside the folder were encrypted containers and text files full of strings and wallet addresses and dates. At first glance, it looked like typical darknet bookkeeping, the kind of thing I had seen before around marketplaces or private forums. My pulse picked up, not because I thought I had found something terrible yet, but because for the first time in months I had found something real. I spent the afternoon digging. By sunset, I had uncovered a hidden browser profile, 2 access keys, and a bookmark folder that opened only when the machine was routed through a private network chain already configured on the device. That was when I found the site. It was called The Feed. No logo, no landing page, no edgy theatrics. Just a black background, white text, a muted chat window, a wallet panel, and in the middle of the screen, a live video. The room in the video was tiled. Concrete floor. Drain in one corner. A steel ring anchored near the center. Overhead light with a weak yellow buzz. There was a woman in the room. She was chained by one ankle to the ring, thin to the point of looking brittle. Knees drawn up. Hair hanging in dirty ropes around her face. She wore what looked like an oversized undershirt torn at the collar. One side of her face was badly bruised. I froze. The first stupid thing I thought was that it had to be fake, because the alternatives were worse. The chat moved slowly. Not thousands of people. Maybe a couple dozen. Maybe fewer. Usernames like account numbers, some with symbols, some with little badges beside them. What they were saying was calm and transactional. No screaming nonsense, no cartoon villain language. They were discussing conditions, how long the overhead light should remain on, whether food should be reduced, whether she should be allowed the blanket in the corner. At the bottom of the stream was a voting box with options. Not violent ones. Not directly. Not then. Just deprivation, heat, light, water, sleep, privacy. It hit me harder because of that. Not because it was more brutal in the obvious sense, but because it was patient. The cruelty of the site was not built around spectacle. It was built around erosion. These people were paying to watch a human being be worn down. I do not know how long I sat there. Eventually, the woman lifted her head and looked toward the camera, not quite directly into it, but near enough that I felt seen anyway. Then she spoke. Her voice was rough and low, like somebody who had not used it properly in a while. She said, "Please, please don't turn it off again." The chat began moving faster. I stood up so abruptly the chair fell backward. I wish I could tell you that my first instinct was noble, that I immediately called the police, or tried to trace the stream, or did anything clean and moral and decisive. I didn't. I recorded it. That is the truth. I screen, captured the interface, copied the page source, photographed the monitor with my phone, grabbed usernames, crypto addresses, anything I could preserve before the stream vanished. Some part of me was horrified. Another part, the old, rotted part of me that had once made a career out of sniffing around evil from behind a keyboard, felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it made me shake. I told myself I was collecting evidence. Maybe I was. Maybe not only that. I stayed on the site for 2 hours. When the stream cut to black for what the interface called a maintenance interval, I finally called emergency services from my mobile. I told them I had found what looked like a live kidnapping stream. I gave them the house address because it was the only concrete location I had, even though I had no reason yet to think the stream was local. The operator asked me a dozen questions in a tone that told me exactly how this was landing. Unstable male caller, isolated property, internet nonsense, maybe drugs involved. They said officers would be notified. Then I waited. No one came that night. I barely slept. The next day, I went back to the computer. That decision changed everything. The site was still there. Same layout, same stream, same woman. This time, the light in the room was off, except for a pale wash from somewhere outside frame. She was shivering. A bucket had been removed. The chat discussed compliance and thresholds, like they were talking about livestock or software. I started looking more closely at the room itself. I do not know what made me do that. Instinct, maybe. Pattern recognition. Something under memory. The tiles were old-fashioned, off-white with a greenish cast. Several along the back wall were cracked in the same spidering pattern. In one corner, there was a patch of rust blooming up from the floor as if water had sat there too long. Above the camera's field of view, every now and then when the image glitched, I could see the edge of a timber beam painted over in white. Familiarity pressed at me. I told myself it was coincidence. Then the camera shifted slightly, just for a second, and I saw a support post on the left side of frame. There were 3 parallel gouges cut into it, deep, crooked, at child height. I stopped breathing. I knew those marks. When I was maybe 9, maybe 10, I used to carry a stolen box cutter around the house because it made me feel less small. One afternoon, I hid in the basement after one of my father's rages and dragged the blade down a white support post 3 times just to hear the sound it made. 3 scratches. I had forgotten that until the moment I saw them. The room on the stream was beneath my house. I wish I had run then. Instead, I tore through the place like a madman. There was one visible basement under the house, accessible from the utility room. It was small and ordinary in the miserable old house sense. Shelves, jars, tools, old paint tins, damp creeping up the concrete. I searched every wall, every corner, every section of floor. Nothing. Then I noticed that one shelf unit had been bolted down through newer concrete than the surrounding slab. I moved it. Underneath was a workbench, and under that, hidden by years of grime and one frayed bit of linoleum, was a seam, a hatch. My mouth went dry. It took all my strength to lift it. The hinges protested with a sound so ugly, I thought for sure somebody below would hear. Under it was a narrow stairwell, vanishing into darkness, and a smell. Not one smell, layers of them. Damp earth, bleach, rust, old waste. Something sweet and rotten underneath it all. I stood there for a long time with a torch in one hand and a hammer in the other, trying to convince myself this was still somehow explainable. Then I went down. The hidden level was larger than the whole visible basement. It spread out under the house in rectangular chambers linked by short passages. The walls were poured concrete. Wiring had been added later in ugly surface-mounted runs. Some sections looked decades old. Others looked recently maintained. There were hooks, chains, shelving units with medical supplies, plastic tubs, a sink with brown staining around the drain, a rack of folded blankets, a row of cameras mounted high in corners, and one room, deeper in, made my stomach fold in on itself because it matched the live stream almost exactly. Same tiles, Same drain, same ring in the floor, only empty. The camera above the door was on. The stream was not coming from somewhere else. It was coming from under my feet while I had been watching it upstairs. I do not remember the next few minutes clearly. I know I backed out. I know I almost fell. I know I was breathing too fast and making these small, helpless sounds that did not sound like they were coming from me. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Not close. Farther in. A door. Shutting. I killed the torch and pressed myself against the wall of the passage. Hammer raised. Heart pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. Nothing followed. Eventually, I crept back up the stairs, shut the hatch, and stood in the utility room, staring at the floor. No police had come. No one knew where I was, except a solicitor, and maybe one old friend I had texted 2 days earlier to say I was going offline for a bit. If there were people using the hidden level, they either already knew I was there or would soon. I should have left. Instead, I went back to the computer. This is the part where a lot of you are probably thinking I'm lying, because normal people do not behave like this. Normal people run. I know. I have thought that too. The problem is that there's a kind of paralysis that feels like investigation when you're inside it. You convince yourself you need one more fact, one more screenshot, one more answer before you can act. The truth is simpler. Sometimes you stay because your terror has latched onto curiosity, and you can no longer separate them. When I logged back in, the chat had changed. There were direct messages waiting. Welcome home, Rook. I had never entered that name on the site. It was the name I used years ago, on old forums and under throwaway investigative accounts. Another message arrived. House manager access pending. Then another. Do not interrupt the return. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. In the livestream window, the woman was awake now. She was leaning against the wall, lips cracked, eyes fixed on the camera. Quietly, she said, "Someone's up there." The chat exploded for the first time since I had found the site. Some users thought she was hallucinating. Others wanted audio cut. One simply typed, "He's late." That message made something icy move through me. I went back down that night. I brought the hammer, a kitchen knife, and my phone with the torch dimmed as low as it could go. I moved through the passages as quietly as I could, stopping every few steps to listen. The hidden level was worse when I let myself really see it. Not in a theatrical way, in the way systems are worse than scenes. There were clipboards, schedules, storage labels, rows of packaged supplies, maintenance logs. The place was not built for a single act of violence. It was built for repetition. In one room, I found shelves full of tapes and hard drives, each marked with dates and initials. In another, I found folded clothing in sealed bags and plastic tubs containing jewelry, watches, wallets, keys. Personal things stripped from people and sorted like inventory. There was an office too, or something close to one. Desk, terminal, ledgers, printed pages with usernames and crypto transfers. Notes in different handwritings. Some of them were my father's. I would know that cramped square script anywhere. That part almost broke me more than the live stream had, because it ended the last stupid hope I had been nursing. This was not something he stumbled into. Not blackmail. Not storage. Not accidental involvement. He ran part of it. My father had not been hiding a secret under the house. He had been maintaining an operation. While I was standing there shaking, I heard a voice from somewhere deeper in the level. A man's voice. Calm, Matter of fact, I could not make out the words. Then another sound, a metal latch. Then a muffled cry that made every hair on my arms stand up. I moved before I had fully decided to. Past the office, down a narrower hall, to a heavy door with a small reinforced glass panel set at eye level. I looked through. The woman from the stream was in there. Up close, she looked older than I had thought at first. Maybe late 30s, but deprivation had carved years into her. She had one wrist cuffed to a wall ring now, as well as the ankle. There was a tray on the floor with water and something untouched in a bowl. And there was something about her face. Not familiarity, exactly. An echo. She looked up toward the little window. For 1 second, our eyes met. Then she frowned, squinting, like she was trying to place me through exhaustion. I stepped back. Someone was coming. I ducked into the side room opposite just before a man in work clothes passed carrying a blanket and a small case. Mid-50s, maybe. Thin, hair shaved close. Expression empty in the practiced way of a nurse or prison guard. He unlocked the room, went in, did something out of my view, and came back out a minute later. When he passed again, I hit him. Not well, not heroically. I swung the hammer one-handed in panic and caught him behind the ear. He collapsed hard against the wall and slid down, groaning. I hit him again because I thought if I didn't, he would stand up and kill me. The noise afterward was horrible. He stopped moving. I stood over him gasping, hammer slick in my hand. Then I took his keys and opened the room. Up close, the woman looked at me with raw suspicion. "Who are you?" she whispered. I said the first true thing I had. "I live here." She flinched like I had struck her. That was the moment I should have understood everything sooner than I did. Instead, I focused on practical things. The cuffs, her condition, whether she could walk. I told her I was getting her out. I kept repeating it because I needed it to be true. She stared at my face the whole time. Finally, she said, "What's your name?" I said, "Rook." Her expression changed. Not relief, not recognition exactly. Something worse. She said, very quietly, "That's not the name they used." I wish I could say I helped her out then and we escaped and everything afterward was just pursuit. The truth is uglier, because the house was already doing something to me. That sounds dramatic, but I do not mean supernatural. I mean memory, association, buried routines waking up because every corridor and object was connected to old fear. As I moved through those rooms, more and more fragments came back. A little hand passing a tray through a doorway. My father's voice saying, "Don't look at them too long." Standing on a stool to reach a deadbolt. Crying through heating vents. A girl sitting at our kitchen table once, hair hacked short, looking at me over a cup with both hands wrapped around it. I had buried all of it so deep that when it came back, it felt less like remembering and more like infection spreading. The woman could barely stand, but she made it into the hall with my arm around her. We got maybe 20 feet before alarms started somewhere overhead. Not loud klaxons, just a muted tone pulsing through speakers. The site knew something had changed. Doors deeper in the hidden level clicked open. Voices, footsteps. The woman gripped my sleeve so hard, her nails bit through fabric. "You can't take the main passage," she whispered. I asked how she knew that. She said, "They move things through there. There's another way." I asked again how she knew that. She looked at me with a kind of exhausted fury and said, "Because I've been here before." Those words hit me like the hammer had hit the caretaker. Before I could ask, A voice echoed down the hall behind us. Rook, not shouted. Calm. Familiar in the worst possible way. I turned. A man stood at the far end of the passage in the half-light. Taller than the one I had killed. Better dressed. Hands clean. Late 60s, maybe. He had the composed, administrative look of someone who never lifts the weight himself but directs where it falls. He said, I wouldn't do this blindly. I knew immediately he was not surprised to see me, which meant I had never really been hidden from the sight at all. The woman beside me began trembling violently. He looked at her, and then back at me. Sable Quill has waited a very long time for this evening, he said. It would be a shame to ruin the restoration. That was her name then, or the name she wore now. Sable Quill. More unique than anything ordinary. The kind of name people in those circles used to turn human beings into symbols. I said, let us go. He almost smiled. You were always going to be given the choice, he said. That is the point of lineage. Something in me recoiled at that word because some part of me already knew what it meant. He took a step closer. Gideon prepared the site for years, he said. He kept excellent records. He understood continuity. Blood remembers what instruction forgets. Sable made a sound in her throat then, half sob, half warning. She told me not to listen, but I already was. Because in the same horrible way, the house had been feeding memory back into me all night. This man's words fit into places that were opening whether I wanted them to or not. My father had not hidden the operation from me because he wanted to protect me. He had hidden it in the way you hide a trade from an apprentice until he is old enough to take over. I wish I could tell you I rejected that immediately and cleanly. Instead, I hesitated. Only for a second. But Sable felt it. She pulled away from me so hard she nearly fell. And in her eyes, I saw something devastating. Not fear of them. Recognition of me. She knew something I did not yet. The man at the end of the hall saw it too. He said, very softly, tell him. Sable shook her head. Tell him, he repeated. Her face twisted. Then she looked straight at me and said, my name before they changed it was Mira. The corridor tilted. That name meant nothing for 1 second. Then everything. A little girl at the kitchen table. A voice behind the heating vent. 3 taps under the floor. A summer storm. My father kneeling beside me in the visible basement, while I stood on an upturned crate to look through a small reinforced window into a lit room below. 2 girls inside, one older, one younger, crying. My father asking, in a patient voice, which one can manage another night? And me pointing. Not because I understood. Not fully. But because children adapt to whatever horror keeps them close to survival. I staggered back like I had been punched. Mira watched me with tears finally spilling over. You chose me, she said. The sentence did not sound accusatory. That was worse. It sounded tired, settled, like a fact she had lived with for too long. I kept saying no. I said it over and over. The man down the corridor let me. He looked pleased. Because that was the real shape of the trap, I think. Not the hidden rooms. Not the live stream. Not even the inheritance. They had built the entire return around memory. They had found Mira, brought her back, staged the stream, left the machine ready for me to discover, because they wanted to know whether Gideon's son would run, expose them, or remember what he had been taught before he was old enough to name it. I wish I could write that. What happened next was a blur, and leave it there, but parts of it are very sharp. The man advanced. I attacked him because there was nothing else left to do. We struggled in the passage. I was bigger, younger, and completely out of control. He was calm in a way that made him more terrifying. He kept trying to talk while we fought, like he was trying to soothe a frightened dog. Mira grabbed a dropped keyring and dragged herself toward a side door while I slammed the man into the wall. He said, right into my ear, "You already know how to manage a room." I hit him until he stopped talking. Then I followed Mira. The side door led into an older section of the hidden level, rougher and lower, with earth-packed walls where later builders had poured concrete around original cavities. There were crawl spaces, service routes, blind turns. My childhood memory knew them better than my conscious mind did. I found myself taking the correct path before I had thought through why. That terrified me almost as much as the men behind us. Mira could barely move, so I half carried her. Somewhere overhead, through vents, I could hear the dull surf of the chat notification tone still chiming. The stream was still live. The audience was still there, watching whatever camera angle remained. At one point, we passed a room with old shelves and children's things in plastic tubs. Small shoes, hair ribbons, a stuffed rabbit with one button eye. Mira shut her eyes as we passed it. I did not ask. Near the base of a ladder that rose toward the utility hatch, she stopped me. She said, "You can't come with me." I thought she was delirious. I asked what she meant. She leaned against the wall, pale and shaking, but suddenly very clear. "You can get me out," she said, "but you can't come with me." I told her that was insane. She looked at me for a long time and then said, "I watched the old recordings. They made me watch them." Cold climbed the back of my neck. I told her not to. She said, "You were a child." I know that. I know what that means. I know who made you that way. But they were right about one thing. I could not speak. She swallowed and said, "When you're scared, your voice changes. You start sounding like him." I wanted to deny it. I couldn't. Because I had heard it too. In little flashes that night. The clipped phrasing. The calm focus around locks, cameras, routes, supplies. My father's habits were not just memories. They were grooves worn into me before I was old enough to resist them. She pressed the keys into my hand. "Open the hatch," she said. "Then leave." I did. We reached the ladder. I climbed first. Shifted the hatch. Felt the utility room air hit my face like something unreal. I turned back to help her up. But before I could, there was movement below. One of them had found us. Mira looked past me into the dark and her expression changed. Not fear, decision. She shoved me upwards so hard my shoulder slammed into the edge of the hatch. "Go," she hissed. I grabbed for her. She jerked away. Then, with a piece of broken tile or metal in her hand, I never saw clearly. She slashed at the figure emerging from the passage and disappeared back into the dark with him in a chaos of motion and shouts. I dropped back down 2 rungs. She screamed one word. "Go." I climbed. I wish I could tell you I went for help and came back. I didn't. I stood in the utility room over the open hatch, shaking, listening to impacts and shouting below. And then something happened that I am more ashamed of than any other line in this whole account. I looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the utility room. I had not noticed it before. The little red indicator was on, and for just 1 second, with the hatch open under me and the hidden level yawning below, I became aware of the audience on the other end of that lens. Not as people exactly. As pressure. As expectation. 100 old instincts I did not know I had seemed to align at once. Containment, control, continuity. Secure the entry point. Stabilize the breach. Maintain the site. I heard my father's voice in my head so clearly it might as well have been in the room. If you hesitate, they scatter. My hands moved before my conscience caught up. I started lowering the hatch. Halfway down, I stopped. I do not know how long I stood there like that. A second. 10. Long enough to understand what I was doing. Long enough to know that some part of me wanted to seal it and keep everything below exactly where it belonged. That realization saved me, or damned me, depending on how you look at it. I yanked the hatch back up and ran. Not down. Out. Through the kitchen. Through the front door. Across the dead grass to my car with the computer tower under one arm and my phone in the other. I nearly crashed backing out of the drive. I drove until sunrise. At some point, I called emergency services again. Then a third time from a different town. Then I called a journalist I used to know who still answered my messages because once, years ago, I had helped him verify a corruption story. I sent him everything I had copied. Screenshots, wallets, usernames, photos of the hidden level, the site address, my notes. By late afternoon, police had gone to the house. By then, it was burning. Not fully engulfed, not cinematic, but enough. Enough to ruin the upper rooms and collapse part of the utilities section. Officially, they found evidence of concealed spaces under the property. They found blood, restraint points, storage areas, networking equipment, burn damage, human biological traces from multiple individuals. They found one dead man in the lower level. They did not find Mira. They did not find the older man. They did not find my father's records because the office had been stripped. They did not find the active terminal or the desktop tower because I had taken one and somebody else had taken the other. They treated me first as a witness, then as a person of interest, then as some miserable combination of traumatized survivor and unreliable narrator once it became clear how much of my account depended on encrypted data and vanished actors. I do not blame them. I barely trust myself. The site went dark for 8 days. On the 9th, it returned under a new address. The journalist sent me the link with one sentence. "You need to see this." I opened it. I should not have, but I did. Same black interface, same silent chat, same careful, bloodless language around deprivation and compliance. The stream showed a different room this time, different tiles, different layout. But I knew the structure immediately. Another node, another house, another caretaker's inheritance. At the start of the feed, the camera panned slowly across the floor and settled on a figure chained in the corner, half hidden by shadow. Too dark to identify. Then a man stepped partly into frame, only his hands visible as he adjusted the lens. His voice, calm and practiced, said, "Welcome back to the feed. Tonight, we begin with family." I closed the sight before the figure in the corner lifted their head. I have not gone back. I do not know whether Mira is alive. I do not know whether that voice belonged to the older man from Marlowe's Ridge or somebody else higher in whatever passes for their order. I do know 2 things. First, my father was not unique. He was replaceable. Second, whatever he did to me as a child did not end when I left that house at 17. It waited. That is the part I am trying hardest to explain, and probably the part people will misunderstand most. When you grow up around sustained cruelty, you imagine the worst thing it can do is normalize fear. It isn't. The worst thing it can do is teach your body a set of responses before your mind is old enough to refuse them. Order, compliance, detachment. The instinct to sort pain into manageable boxes. The temptation to call control mercy. All my life, I thought I was running from Gideon Vey. Now I think I was running from the architecture he left inside me. I keep replaying that moment over the hatch. The partial lowering, the terrible ease of it. I did not seal Mira down there, but I thought about it for a second, and the second was real. That is why I am posting this here instead of handing it neatly to a publisher, or keeping it inside a police file where it can be labeled and shelved and forgotten. People need to understand that places like that are not powered only by obvious sadists. They are also powered by habit, inheritance, compartments, and children taught to mistake procedure for safety. There is one more thing. 3 nights ago, in the motel where I have been staying under a name I do not use online, I woke up to a sound under the bed. 3 taps. Then silence. 3 taps again. I tore the mattress off the frame. I checked the pipes. I checked the walls. Nothing. I did not sleep after that. Maybe it was building noise. Maybe my head is finally splitting apart under all of this. Or maybe somebody out there wants me to know that lineages do not end just because one house burns. If any of you know anything about hidden service communities using the name The Feed, or about properties passed through family probate with unusually high private network traffic tied to them, archive everything before you reach out. Do not be heroic. Do not go alone. Do not assume local police will understand what they are looking at. And if you ever find yourself in an old house where every answer is pipes, foxes, or wind, leave before the floor starts knocking back. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary story. Until next time.